My daughter thought I did not see her slip a vial of strange blue liquid into my clam chowder. She smiled at me, thinking she had won, thinking the old man was too blind to notice his own execution. But the moment she turned her back to get the bread, I switched my bowl with her husband's. 10 minutes later, he was on the floor, gasping for air, foaming at the mouth, and I was just finishing my meal. Before I tell you how my own family tried to kill me and how I made them pay for it, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful family member a lesson they will never forget. It was a Sunday in Atlanta, humid and heavy, much like the atmosphere inside my own home. I am Reginald Carter, 72 years old, a retired chief engineer for the railway system. I spent 40 years listening to the rhythm of steel on steel, learning that even the smallest crack in a track can derail 1,000 tons of iron. I apply that same logic to my life. My family was not just cracked, they were broken beyond repair. The house smelled of bacon grease and false intentions. Nia, my only daughter, was humming in the kitchen, a sound that used to bring me joy but now only signaled manipulation. She insisted on making Sunday dinner. She said she was making clam chowder her specialty. She knows I hate cream-based soups. They settle heavy in my stomach and remind me of hospital food, but she insisted it was special just for me. In the living room, Hunter, the man she married against my advice, was sprawled out on my leather recliner like he owned the deed to the property. He is 35, white, a failed real estate agent who talks about cryptocurrency and flipping houses while living rent-free under my roof. He did not even look up when I walked in with my cane tapping against the hardwood floors. He just kept his eyes glued to the football game, scratching his stomach, his feet resting on the coffee table. My late wife Beatrice and I bought 30 years ago. They moved in 6 months ago, claiming they wanted to take care of me in my old age. That is the lie they tell the neighbors and the church congregation. The truth is they lost their condo, maxed out their credit cards, and needed a host to leech off. I watched Hunter reach for a beer, one of my beers, and felt a cold knot of disgust in my chest. "Hey, Reggie, is the food coming or what? I am starving over here," he shouted toward the kitchen, not even offering me the dignity of eye contact. He never calls me Dad, just Reggie. I gripped the handle of my cane until my knuckles turned ash gray. "Patience, Reginald. You learned patience waiting for signal lights on the midnight line. You can wait a little longer." I walked toward the kitchen, moving slowly, playing the part of the frail old man they desperately wanted me to be. The kitchen is the heart of this house, but today it felt like a crime scene. Nia was standing at the stove, her back to me, stirring a pot that bubbled thickly. She did not hear my soft-soled slippers approach. I stopped at the doorway, staying in the shadows of the hallway. I did not announce my presence. Years of inspecting trains taught me that you see the most when people think no one is watching. I looked past her shoulder at the black glass of the built-in microwave above the stove. It acted as a perfect dark mirror. Through that reflection, I saw her hand reach deep into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a small glass vial, no bigger than a thumb drive. It contained a liquid that looked pale blue, unnatural, like detergent. My heart did not race. My pulse did not spike. Instead, a wave of cold, icy clarity washed over me. It was the feeling of confirming a structural failure. I watched in the reflection as she uncorked the vial with trembling fingers. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes wide and fearful, scanning the living room where Hunter was yelling at the television. She did not see me in the shadows. Satisfied she was unobserved, she turned back to the counter and poured every single drop of that blue liquid into the bowl on the left. My bowl, the one with the small chip on the rim that I have used for 20 years. She stirred it quickly, frantically burying the poison under the thick white chowder. Then she took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and pasted a smile on her face. It was a terrifying transformation. 1 second, she was a nervous wreck. The next, she was the doting daughter. So this is how it ends, I thought to myself. Not with a bang, not with a dignified passing in my sleep, but with a bowl of soup prepared by the child I raised. I was not shocked. I was not even hurt. I was simply ready. "Dad, dinner is ready. Come sit down," Nia called out, her voice pitching slightly higher than normal. I walked into the light of the kitchen, leaning heavily on my cane, shuffling my feet more than necessary. She had placed the 2 bowls on the kitchen island. The poisoned one, the one in the chipped bowl, was clearly set at the head of the table where I always sit. Hunter dragged himself off the sofa, groaning as if walking 20 feet was a marathon. "Finally, I could eat a horse," he grumbled, taking his seat opposite me. Nia turned back to the oven, her back to us again. "Oh shoot, I forgot the garlic bread in the warmer. Be right back," she said. This was it. My window of opportunity. The universe had given me 3 seconds. I did not hesitate. I did not shake. My engineer hands, steady as steel tracks, reached out across the table. In one fluid motion, I slid my chipped bowl over to Hunter's placemat and pulled his pristine bowl over to mine. I rotated the spoons so they looked untouched, perfectly aligned. It was seamless. A magic trick performed by a man fighting for his life. When Nia turned back around with the bread basket, I was standing exactly where she left me, my hands resting innocently on my cane. She looked at the bowls. She looked at me. She didn't notice a thing. Her arrogance blinded her. She assumed I was too slow, too old, too stupid to react. Hunter sat down and pulled the bowl toward him, the steam rising into his face. "Looks good, babe," he said, grabbing a spoon. He didn't wait for grace. He didn't wait for me to sit. He just shoveled a massive spoonful of the tainted chowder into his mouth. I sat opposite him, moving with agonizing slowness. I picked up my spoon. I looked my daughter in the eye. "Thank you for cooking, Nia," I said, my voice steady and deep. We ate in silence. The only sound was the clinking of spoons and Hunter's loud, wet chewing. The soup I was eating was actually decent, rich and savory, minus the lethal additive. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, watching them. Nia was not eating. She was watching me like a hawk watches a dying mouse. She was waiting for me to choke. She was waiting for me to clutch my chest. She was waiting for her inheritance to kick in. Every time I swallowed, she flinched slightly. Hunter, however, was devouring his meal. He wiped the bowl clean with a piece of garlic bread, soaking up the last dregs of the blue poison. That hit the spot. He belched, patting his stomach. I finished my bowl and set the spoon down gently. Then it started. Hunter frowned. He touched his throat, rubbing it as if he had swallowed a bee. "Is it hot in here?" he asked, tugging at his collar. His face, usually pale, began to turn a bright, alarming shade of crimson. He stood up, knocking his chair over with a loud crash. He clawed at his neck, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. His eyes bulged out of his head, bloodshot and terrified. Foam, white and frothy, started to gather at the corners of his mouth. He tried to speak, to call out to his wife, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. He collapsed onto the linoleum floor, his body seizing violently, his heels drumming against the cabinets. Nia screamed. It was a blood-curdling sound that shattered the Sunday quiet. She dropped her water glass, and it smashed into 1,000 pieces. She looked at Hunter, writhing on the floor. Then she looked at me. I was sitting calmly, wiping my mouth with a paper napkin, watching the chaos with the detachment of a stranger. She looked at my empty bowl. Then she looked at Hunter's empty bowl. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her eyes went wide with horror, not just for her husband, but for herself. "Dad," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me, her face twisted in accusation. "What did you do?" "You killed him. That was my soup." She had just confessed, but in the panic of the moment, she didn't even realize what she had said. I looked at her, my expression stone cold. I leaned forward and whispered so only she could hear over Hunter's gasps. "He ate from the bowl you gave him, Nia. I guess he just liked your cooking more than I did." The red and white lights of the ambulance pulsed through the front window, cutting through the humid Atlanta night like a strobe light in a horror movie. Chaos had consumed my living room, but I remained the eye of the storm. I sat in my leather recliner, my hands resting calmly on the head of my cane, watching the paramedics work on the man who had intended to watch me die tonight. They ripped open Hunter's shirt buttons, popping onto the hardwood floor, attaching leads to his hairless chest. His body arched off the floor, his heels drumming a frantic rhythm against the wood. Nia was hysterical. She hovered over them, her hands trembling, her face a mask of ruined makeup and terror. She was not crying for her husband. I knew my daughter. She was crying because her plan had gone spectacularly wrong. "Sir, we need you to step back," a paramedic shouted at me, thinking I was in shock. I did not move. "I am fine right here," I replied, my voice level and devoid of emotion. They loaded Hunter onto the gurney. He was unconscious now, his breathing shallow and ragged, a string of drool running down his chin. As they wheeled him toward the door, Nia turned to me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and hatred that would have broken a weaker father's heart. But my heart had calcified long ago. "Dad, you need to come with us," she shrieked, grabbing her purse. "You need to explain what you did." I stood up slowly, using the cane, not because I needed it, but because it added to the image of the frail old man they underestimated. I did nothing, Naya, I said, looking her dead in the eye. I simply ate my dinner. Then I leaned in close, ignoring the paramedics bustling around us. But tell me something. He ate the soup from my bowl, didn't he? The color drained from her face so completely she looked like a ghost. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, to scream, but no sound came out. The realization that I knew that I had known the entire time locked her throat tight. She stumbled backward, almost tripping over the rug, and ran out the door after the gurney without saying another word. I followed at my own pace, locking the front door behind me. A retired engineer does not leave his station unsecured even in an emergency. As I sat in the back of the police cruiser that offered to take me to the hospital, I watched the city lights blur past. My mind drifted back to a Tuesday afternoon 3 months ago. That was the day the war really began. Hunter had cornered me in the garage while I was organizing my tools. He didn't offer to help. He just leaned against my workbench drinking a beer he hadn't paid for. Reggie, look, I have this opportunity. He had started using that salesman voice that made my skin crawl. It is a crypto investment, guaranteed 10 times return in a month. I just need $50,000, a bridge loan. I didn't even look up from the lawnmower engine I was repairing. Get a job. Hunter, I had said. He had laughed then, a dry, humorless sound. You are sitting on all this equity, Reggie. You have stocks, you have the pension, you have this house. You can't take it with you. I finally looked at him then. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold. People at your age have accidents all the time, Reggie. Stairs are slippery. Gas stoves get left on. It would be a shame if something happened before you enjoyed your money. He took a sip of his beer and walked away. That was not a request for a loan. It was a declaration of intent. I realized then that my silence about my true net worth had not protected me. It had only made them impatient. They thought I was a stingy old man with a modest nest egg. If they knew I had millions in land and blue-chip stocks accumulated over 40 years of railroad work, they wouldn't have waited 3 months. They would have burned the house down that night. The waiting room at Grady Memorial Hospital smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. I sat in a plastic chair reading an old magazine while Naya paced back and forth chewing her fingernails. A doctor emerged through the double doors looking grave. Family of Hunter Sullivan, he called out. Naya rushed to him. I stayed seated listening. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband is in critical condition, the doctor said, consulting his clipboard. We found high concentrations of a substance called xylazine in his system. It is a powerful veterinary sedative often used for horses. Combined with the alcohol in his system, it caused severe respiratory depression and a seizure. If he had arrived 10 minutes later, he would be dead. Horse tranquilizer. My daughter had put enough horse tranquilizer in my soup to kill a Clydesdale, let alone a 72-year-old man. She really didn't want to take any chances. Nia covered her mouth, letting out a sob that sounded performative to my ears. Oh my God, she cried. How could this happen? Then she turned, pointing a shaking finger at me across the room. It's him. It's my father. The doctor looked at me, then back at Nia. Ma'am, he asked, confused. He has dementia? Nia lied, her voice rising in pitch. He mixes up his medications. He has these drops for his glaucoma and he gets confused. He must have put them in the soup thinking it was seasoning. I told him he shouldn't be in the kitchen. He's dangerous. He almost killed my husband. The doctor looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I sat there blinking, slowly playing the part. I did not have glaucoma. I did not have dementia. But I knew that denying it now while screaming about murder plots would only make me look like the senile old man she was painting me to be. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the engineer. 2 police officers approached us, drawn by Naya's accusations. One was a young rookie scribbling in a notebook. The other was older, a sergeant with tired eyes who had seen too many domestic disputes. Ma'am, are you saying your father poisoned your husband? The sergeant asked. Yes, Nia insisted, tears streaming down her face. He is losing his mind. He doesn't know what he's doing. He needs to be in a home. We have been trying to find him a place, but he refuses. Now look what happened. She was building her case. This wasn't just about covering her tracks for the poisoning. This was her move to get power of attorney. If she could prove I was incompetent and dangerous, she could lock me away and take control of everything. The sergeant walked over to me. He loomed over my chair, his hand resting near his belt. Sir, do you know where you are? He asked slowly, loudly, as if I were deaf. I looked up at him. I am at Grady Memorial, Sergeant, I said, my voice clear and sharp. And I do not have dementia. My daughter is upset. The sergeant narrowed his eyes. She says you put medication in the food. Is that true? I shook my head. I didn't put anything in the food. I didn't cook the food. Nia cooked. I just ate. Nia rushed over. He's lying. He always lies when he's confused. Check his pockets. He probably still has the bottle. I stood up then. I emptied my pockets. A wallet, a handkerchief, keys. No bottle. The sergeant looked back at Nia. Ma'am, there is nothing here. Nia looked frantic. She knew the bottle wasn't on me. She knew exactly where it was because she had put it there. But she couldn't say that. I looked at the sergeant, then shifted my gaze to Nia. She froze. If you are looking for the source of the poison, officer, I said, keeping my tone helpful and mild, you might want to check the kitchen trash can at my house. I believe I saw my daughter throw a small blue glass vial in there right before she served the soup. She seemed very anxious to hide it beneath the coffee grounds. And officer, I added, pausing for effect, I bet if you check that vial you will find only her fingerprints on it. Nia stopped breathing. The trap had snapped shut. The house was silent when I returned, a heavy, suffocating silence that felt more like a held breath than peace. I locked the front door, engaging the deadbolt and the chain, my old hands moving with practiced precision. I did not go to my bedroom. I did not go to the kitchen to clean up the remnants of the poisoned dinner. I went straight to the guest room, the room Nia and Hunter had claimed 6 months ago. They had moved in with only a few suitcases, claiming they wanted to downsize to save for a dream home. Now I knew the only dream they had was waiting for me to die so they could cash in. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of Hunter's cheap body spray and Nia's cloying vanilla perfume, a scent that barely masked the underlying odor of stale laundry and neglect. I turned on the light. It was a mess. Clothes were piled on the chair, empty soda cans littered the nightstand. I started my search. I did not rummage like a thief. I searched like an engineer looking for a fault line. I checked under the mattress. Nothing. I checked the closet shelves. Just clothes. Then I turned my attention to the small travel safe Nia kept on the floor of the closet. It was a cheap digital model, the kind you buy at a discount store. Nia always used her birthday for everything. I punched in the numbers. The light turned green. The door clicked open. Inside there was no jewelry, no cash, no family heirlooms. It was stuffed with paper. I took the stack to the kitchen table, spreading them out under the harsh light of the chandelier. What I saw made my blood run cold, not with fear, but with a deep, seething anger. These were not just bills. They were final notices, threatening letters from collection agencies. And at the bottom of the stack, a foreclosure notice for a condo in Buckhead I didn't even know they owned. The date on the foreclosure was 6 months ago, the exact week they moved in with me. They hadn't come here out of love. They had come here because they were homeless. I sat there for an hour, piecing together the wreckage of their financial lives. Hunter had leveraged everything. He had taken out loans against their condo, maxed out credit cards in Nia's name, and even taken out a high-interest personal loan from a company that didn't have a website, just a P.O. box in a shady part of town. The numbers were staggering. They were nearly $200,000 in debt. But the most chilling document was a printed estimation from a real estate website. It was a printout of my address. My house. They had circled the estimated value in red marker. $1.2 million. I bought this house 40 years ago for a fraction of that, but the neighborhood had gentrified. The old rail yards were now trendy lofts. The corner stores were now organic markets. My modest 3-bedroom brick house sat on a double lot that developers were drooling over. To Hunter and Nia, I wasn't a father. I was a lottery ticket. I was an asset to be liquidated. They had done the math. If I died, the house would be theirs. They could sell it to the first developer who knocked on the door, pay off their debts, and still have $1 million to blow on Hunter's crypto scams and Nia's vanity. I looked at the dates on the calendar on the fridge. The foreclosure on their condo had been finalized 3 days ago. The loan sharks were calling daily according to the call logs I found on an old phone they left in the drawer. They were out of time. That was why they escalated. That was why the poison happened tonight. They didn't have months to wait for nature to take its course. They needed me dead before the end of the month. I was sitting on a gold mine and they were standing on a landmine. They figured if they pushed me off, they could take the gold before the explosion hit them. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet house. 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. I sat in the dark, the papers spread out before me like a map of their betrayal. I was not afraid of them anymore. I was disgusted. I felt the fool for letting them into my sanctuary, for believing even for a second that Nia wanted to be closer to her father. She just wanted to be closer to the deed. Then the silence shattered. 3 loud, violent bangs shook the front door. The wood groaned under the impact. I didn't jump. I didn't panic. I just gripped my cane. A voice deep and gravelly roared from the other side. "Hunter, open the door. We know you are in there." I walked softly to the hallway, staying out of the line of sight of the windows. I peered through the peephole. A man stood on my porch. He was massive, wearing a leather jacket despite the humid heat. He held a baseball bat loosely in his right hand, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. A dark sedan idled at the curb, its headlights cut. This was not a bank collector. This was the street coming to collect. "Hunter isn't here," I said through the door, my voice calm and firm. "I am calling the police." The man laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "Tell that punk he has until Friday." "Friday, old man. Or we stop asking nicely." He slammed the bat against the doorframe one last time, splintering the wood, then turned and walked back to the car. I watched them drive away. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. Friday. Today was Sunday. They had 5 days. If Hunter didn't pay them, they would come back. And if Hunter was in the hospital or in jail, they would come for me. They assumed I was part of this. They assumed the house was the collateral. I went back to the kitchen. I looked at the phone. It was 3 in the morning. Most people would wait until business hours. But I was not most people, and Alana Ross was not most lawyers. I dialed her private number. She answered on the second ring, her voice clear and alert, as if she had been waiting for my call. "Reginald," she said, "it is 3 in the morning. Tell me nobody is dead." "Not yet," I replied. "But they tried. Naya tried to poison me tonight. Hunter is in the hospital, and I just had a loan shark threaten to break my door down." There was a pause on the line. I heard the rustle of sheets, the click of a bedside lamp turning on. "Are you safe right now?" she asked. "I am secure," I said. "But I am done playing defense, Alana. I found their papers. They are bankrupt. They are desperate. And they think I am a senile old man sitting on $1 million teardown." I heard the sound of a pen scratching on paper. "What do you want to do?" "Reggie, activate the legacy protocol," I said. "I want everything locked down. I want the trust activated. And Alana, I want you to prepare the transfer documents for the properties they don't know about. If they want a war, I'm going to give them an apocalypse. Consider it done." Alana said, her voice turning hard and professional. "Get some sleep, Reggie. By the time the sun comes up, you will be the hardest target in Atlanta." I hung up the phone. I didn't sleep. I made a pot of coffee, strong and black. I sat in my armchair facing the door, my cane across my lap. I waited for the sun to rise on a new world, a world where I had no daughter, only an enemy. Alana Ross does not serve coffee in her office. She serves strategies sitting behind a desk made of glass and chrome overlooking the Atlanta skyline. She laid out the new rules of engagement. They want to paint you as senile, Reggie, so let them. If you fight back with logic and anger, now they will claim it is aggression, a symptom of dementia. They are building a narrative that you are a confused old man who accidentally poisoned his son-in-law because he mistook horse tranquilizers for salt. Give them exactly what they want. Become the doddering, forgetful father. Make them believe they are winning, because when amateurs think they have won, they get sloppy and they make mistakes. I nodded slowly, digesting the bitterness of her advice. It went against every fiber of my being. I pride myself on my sharp mind and my dignity. I spent 40 years ensuring the safety of thousands of passengers by being precise and unyielding, but I understood the mechanics of leverage to derail a train. You do not stand. In front of it, you loosen the tracks miles before the curve. So I agreed I would play the fool. I would let them think the lion had lost its teeth while I sharpened my claws in the dark. Hunter came home 2 days later in a wheelchair pushed by a sullen and exhausted Naya. He looked like a man who had seen the other side and found it terrifying. His face was slack on the left side, a lingering effect of the neurotoxin, and his speech was a thick, wet slur. When I opened the door, leaning heavily on my cane and squinting as if I could not quite recognize them, his eyes widened in sheer terror. He tried to push himself backward in the chair, his hands scrabbling uselessly against the wheels. He knew he looked at me, and he did not see a frail old man. He saw the executioner who had sat across from him and watched him eat poison without blinking. He wanted to scream. He wanted to accuse me, but he couldn't, because to accuse me was to admit he and Nia had brought the poison into the house in the first place. He was trapped in his own silence. "Welcome home, son," I said, my voice trembling with feigned weakness. "I made tea." Hunter actually flinched at the word tea, flinching so hard he nearly tipped the wheelchair. I smiled inwardly. Fear is a powerful tool, and for the first time in months, fear had changed sides. The gaslighting began. The very next morning it was clumsy and obvious but relentless. My reading glasses, which I always leave on the nightstand, would vanish and appear in the refrigerator inside a carton of milk. The TV remote would be found in the bathroom sink, soaking in water. Naya would look at me with practiced pity, shaking her head. "Dad, you are getting so forgetful," she would say in a loud, slow voice. "Do you remember putting the milk in the cupboard?" I did not argue. I apologized. I looked confused. I played the part. Alana wrote for me. I let them see a man losing his grip on reality. But while they were sleeping, the engineer was working. I ordered micro cameras online, the kind used for espionage. High definition and motion activated. I installed them inside the smoke detectors behind the air vents, and in the kitchen molding, I turned my house into a panopticon. 2 nights later, the cameras paid for themselves. I watched the live feed on my tablet in the locked safety of my bedroom. Nia was in the kitchen making my evening herbal tea. She looked over her shoulder just like before, checking the empty hallway. Then she took a white pill from her pocket, crushed it with the back of a spoon, and swept the powder into my steaming mug. Ambien, she was drugging me to ensure I slept through their late-night searching parties. I went downstairs, took the tea with a shaking hand, and thanked her. My voice cracking with gratitude. As soon as I was alone in my room, I poured every drop into the potted ficus in the corner. That tree is going to sleep very well. But I stayed wide awake, watching them on my screen as they rifled through my desk downstairs, looking for bank accounts that did not exist. Then came the call that confirmed their next move. I was polishing my shoes in the hallway, enjoying the meditative rhythm of the brush, when I heard Nia on the phone in the dining room. She wasn't whispering anymore. She thought I was sedated upstairs, unconscious from the Ambien. She thought she was safe. "Hunter, give me the number for that friend of yours," she said, her voice sharp and impatient. "The one who lost his medical license in Florida." "Yeah, Dr. Vance. I do not care how much he charges. We need a signature." "Hunter, we need a professional to say Dad is incompetent." "Okay, tomorrow at 10. Bring him over. I will make sure Dad is pliable." I recorded every word on my phone, my hand steady as a rock. They weren't just gaslighting me anymore. They were bringing in a hired gun to assassinate my character legally. I went back to my room and laid out my best suit for the next day. If they wanted a show, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Dr. Sterling Vance walked into my living room, smelling of peppermint mouthwash and stale desperation. He was a man held together by hair gel and a prayer, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, but was wrinkled at the elbows, telling me he had likely slept in it or spent the night at a card table. Hunter greeted him with a bro hug that lingered too long, the secret handshake of men who owe money to the same dangerous people. I sat in my armchair, wrapped in a knitted blanket I did not need, watching them through half-closed eyes. My lawyer Alana had sent me his file at dawn. Vance was not just a psychiatrist, he was a walking liability. His license was currently under review in Florida for overprescribing opioids, and his credit report looked like a crime scene. He owed 6 figures to casinos in Atlantic City and another $40,000 to a bookie in Buckhead. He was not here to evaluate my mental health, he was here to sell his signature for quick cash. He looked at me not as a patient, but as a stack of chips he needed to win back his dignity. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice slick and oily like a used car salesman. "I'm here to have a little chat to see how you are doing." I stared past his ear at the wall, letting my jaw hang slightly loose. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Are you the man to fix the boiler?" Vance smiled at Nia, a predatory grin that said this would be the easiest money he ever made. The assessment was a farce, a piece of theater so poorly written it was insulting. Vance sat across from me, tapping a gold pen against a clipboard, while Nia and Hunter hovered in the doorway like vultures waiting for the carcass to cool. "Mr. Carter, can you tell me what year it is?" Vance asked. I furrowed my brow, acting as if the question required complex calculus. "It is 1998, I said, confident in my error. "I have to get to the station. The 9:15 freight is coming in." Nia let out a small theatrical gasp, putting her hand over her mouth. "Oh, Dad," she whispered loud enough for the cheap seats. "It is worse than I thought." I saw Hunter smirk behind her back, his face still sagging from the stroke I gave him, but his eyes gleaming with greed. He thought he had won. He thought the old engineer was finally derailed. Vance made a show of writing a long note. "And who is the president, sir?" he asked. I looked around the room, eyes darting nervously. "Eisenhower," I whispered. "I like Ike." Hunter actually chuckled a wet, gurgling sound. Vance nodded gravely, looking at Nia with practiced sympathy. It appears to be advanced dementia, Mrs. Sullivan. He is completely disoriented in time and space. He presents a danger to himself and others. I recommend immediate custodial care and transfer of financial power of attorney. Nia hugged Hunter, burying her face in his shoulder to hide her smile. Thank you, doctor, she said, her voice thick with fake tears. We just want him safe. It is so hard to see him like this. It was a masterclass in deception, but they forgot one thing. An engineer always tests the integrity of the bridge before crossing it. Can I have a glass of water? I asked, my voice frail. Nia jumped up. Of course, Dad. I will get it. She pulled Hunter toward the kitchen, eager to celebrate their victory, leaving me alone with the man who was about to sign my life away. The moment they left the room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. I sat up straight, dropping the blanket. I locked eyes with Vance, and the fog cleared from my face, leaving only the hard, cold stare of a man who had fired people for incompetence. You have a tell, Dr. Vance, I said, my voice dropping an octave, returning to its natural commanding timbre. You tap your pen when you are bluffing. Vance froze. His pen stopped midair. Excuse me, he stammered, his oily smile faltering. I reached under the cushion of my chair and pulled out a thick manila envelope, not the water glass Nia was fetching. I tossed it onto his lap. It landed with a heavy thud. Inside that envelope is a printout of your transaction history at the Borgata Casino from last weekend, I said. You lost $12,000 on blackjack in 4 hours. You also have a wire transfer pending to a man named Rico for $25,000. If that money does not arrive by Friday, Rico is going to break your thumbs. Vance went pale, the color draining from his face as if I had pulled a gun. Who are you? He whispered. I am the man who can solve your problem or end your career, I replied. I pulled a second envelope from my jacket pocket. This one was white and thick with cash. $5,000 untraceable. It covers your interest payment to Rico for this week. It buys you time. Vance looked at the money, then at me, then at the door. What do you want? He asked, his voice trembling. I want you to sign 2 papers, I said. One for my daughter saying I am incompetent, and one for me, a notarized affidavit stating I am of sound mind and body, fully capable of managing my own affairs, dated today, time stamped 5 minutes ago. You give the fake one to them, you give the real one to me. And if you ever try to cross me or testify against me, I will send your wife the photos of you and the cocktail waitress from the Golden Nugget. They are in the manila envelope too. Take a look. He opened the envelope, saw the pictures, and looked at me with pure terror. He realized then that he was not dealing with a senile victim. He was dealing with a predator. Vance signed the papers so fast the ink barely had time to dry. He shoved the cash into his jacket pocket and the real affidavit under my cushion just as Nia walked back in with the water. Her face was flushed with victory. Here you go, Dad, she said, handing me the glass. Vance stood up, buttoning his wrinkled jacket, trying to regain his composure. Mrs. Sullivan, I have completed the evaluation, he said, his voice shaking only slightly. Your father is indeed incapacitated. I will prepare the formal report for the court stating he requires immediate guardianship. That will be $500 for the consult. Nia practically threw her credit card at him. Thank you, doctor, she said. You have no idea how much this helps us. Vance took the payment, looked at me one last time with the eyes of a man who had stared into the abyss, and ran out the front door. Nia turned to Hunter and high-fived him right in front of me. I took a sip of water and smiled. They had a piece of paper that said they won. I had a piece of paper that proved they were liars and enough leverage to bury them all. The game was just getting interesting. The deadline from the loan sharks was approaching like a freight train with no brakes, and the tension inside my house was thick enough to choke on. It was Friday morning, and Hunter was pacing the living room floor, dragging his left leg, which still had not fully recovered from the nerve damage I gifted him. His phone buzzed every hour on the hour. Each time he looked at the screen, his face would drain of color and he would reject the call. I knew exactly who it was. It was Rico the loan shark, who had promised to break Hunter's thumbs if $25,000 did not appear by sunset. Nia was in a state of manic energy, cleaning surfaces that were already clean, her eyes darting around the room, scanning for anything of value that wasn't bolted down. They were rats on a sinking ship, and the water was rising fast. I sat in my armchair listening to an old jazz record, watching them sweat. I knew exactly where their desperation would lead them next. My study. Specifically the fireproof safe bolted to the floor in the closet. Beatrice, my late wife, had kept her jewelry there. A diamond tennis bracelet, her engagement ring, a pearl necklace valued at $10,000. Nia knew about them. She used to play with them as a child, dressing up in front of the mirror. I could see the calculation in her eyes. Selling Beatrice's jewelry would cover the interest payment. It would buy them another week of life. It was despicable, but predictable. Around 2 in the afternoon, I feigned a nap. I went to my room, closed the door loudly, and waited. 10 minutes later, I heard the creak of the floorboards in the hallway. They were moving toward the study. I gave them 5 minutes to struggle with the lock before I made my entrance. I opened the study door quietly, leaning heavily on my cane. The scene before me was pathetic. Hunter was on his knees, sweating through his shirt, trying to pry the safe door open with a flathead screwdriver. Nia was shining a flashlight on the dial, trying to remember a combination she hadn't known for 20 years. They froze when they saw me. Hunter dropped the screwdriver and it clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. Nia stood up so fast she knocked over a stack of books. They looked like deer caught in headlights, waiting for the gunshot. Dad, Nia stammered, her voice high and guilty. "We were just looking for something. We heard a noise. We thought someone broke in." I didn't let her finish. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. I shuffled forward, squinting my eyes behind my glasses, letting my mouth hang slightly open in a confused smile. "Oh, thank goodness you are here," I said, my voice trembling with relief. "I have been looking for the key all week. I wanted to check on your mother's things, but I forgot where I put it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small brass key. I held it out to Hunter, my hand shaking just enough to sell the performance. "Can you open it for me, son? My hands aren't what they used to be." Hunter looked at the key, then at me. He couldn't believe his luck. He grabbed the key from my hand, his greed overpowering his suspicion. "Of course, Reggie," he said, his voice thick with false kindness. "Let me help you with that." He thought I was a senile old fool handing over the family fortune. He didn't know I was handing him a hand grenade. Hunter jammed the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked smoothly. He pulled the heavy steel door open, his body blocking my view, but I didn't need to see. I knew exactly what was inside because I had cleared it out 3 days ago. I moved the jewelry to a safety deposit box downtown. In its place, I left a little surprise. Hunter reached in, eager to grab the velvet boxes. He froze. He pulled his hand out, holding a single, thin savings passbook and a stack of crumpled papers. "Where is it?" Nia hissed, peering over his shoulder. "Where is Mom's jewelry?" I leaned in, acting confused. "Is it not there?" I asked, scratching my head. "I must have moved it. Or maybe I sold it. I don't remember." Hunter threw the papers on the desk in a rage. He opened the passbook. His eyes scanned the final entry. $500.42. That was the balance I had left in that decoy account. $500. Not enough to pay Rico's interest. Not enough to buy a used car. Then he looked at the other papers. I had printed them off the internet and aged them with coffee stains, fake liens, fake medical bills, fake notices of debt totaling nearly $100,000 against the house. I had created a paper trail of a destitute old man drowning in debt. Hunter turned purple. "He is broke," he whispered, his voice strangling in his throat. Nia snatched the papers. "No, no, no," she screamed, flipping through them. "This can't be right. The house has a second mortgage. He owes the hospital. He has nothing." She looked at me with pure venom. "You useless old man," she spat. "Where did all the money go?" I just blinked, looking at the empty safe. "I like to buy lottery tickets," I mumbled. "I think I am going to win next week." Nia collapsed into the office chair, sobbing. Not out of grief, but out of the realization that there was no pot of gold to steal. Hunter kicked the desk, leaving a black scuff mark on the wood. "We are dead," he said, staring at the wall. "We are actually dead." They left me in the study, ignoring me completely as if I were a piece of furniture. I was no longer a person to them. I was a dry well, a waste of space. I listened from the top of the stairs as they argued in the kitchen below. The desperation had curdled into something darker. Theft was no longer an option because there was nothing to steal, or so they thought. "We need a payout," Hunter said, his voice low and frantic. "A big one. Life insurance." Nia stopped crying. "Does he have a policy?" she asked. "I do not know, but we can get one." Hunter said. We can get a term policy. High value. Accidental death pays double. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They were moving to the endgame. And how do we collect Nia? Asked her voice, steadying. Accidents happen, Hunter replied. Old men fall downstairs all the time, especially when the stairs are slippery. He is frail, Nia. He won't survive a fall. I went back to my room and locked the door. I looked at the cameras on my tablet. They were hugging in the kitchen, plotting my murder. I wasn't scared. I was insulted. They thought they could outsmart me in my own house. I picked up my phone and called Alana. Prepare the paperwork, I said. They took the bait. Now we close the trap. The knock on the door came at 9 a.m, sharp, just as Hunter had promised. He opened it with a fervor that bordered on mania, ushering in a man who introduced himself as Mr. Thorne. Thorne was a caricature of a professional wearing a suit that was too shiny and a smile that showed too many teeth. He carried a leather briefcase that looked brand new and smelled of synthetic leather. Hunter introduced him as a contractor, a specialist in home renovations who needed my signature to begin the structural repairs on the roof. It was a lie so thin I could see right through it. I sat at the dining room table, my hands trembling with a calculated frailty, while Thorne spread a thick stack of documents before me. These were not work orders or permits. I could read upside down, a skill I acquired during decades of reviewing blueprints across a crowded table. The headers were obscured by sticky notes marked "Sign Here," but the layout was unmistakable. It was a term life insurance policy. The face value was $2 million with a double indemnity clause for accidental death. Hunter hovered behind me, his breath hot on my neck, his eyes darting between the pen in my hand and the dotted line. He was practically vibrating with greed. Just some standard liability waivers, Reggie, he said, his voice tight. We want to make sure the workers are covered if they slip on the roof. I adjusted my glasses, leaning in close to the paper. I feigned difficulty reading the fine print, mumbling about the font size. Thorne tapped the signature line with a manicured fingernail. Right here, Mr. Carter, he urged. Just a formality so we can get the crew started tomorrow. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was a confused old man intimidated by legal jargon and official-looking seals. They did not know they were sitting across from the man who had negotiated union contracts for the Southeast Railway for 20 years. I knew how to read a room better than they knew how to read a menu. I knew that when a man is desperate for a signature, he stops looking at the document and starts looking at the hand holding the pen. I knew that their arrogance was their blind spot. I reached into my cardigan pocket for my own pen, a heavy brass fountain pen I had used since the 80s. I dropped it. It clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor, rolling under the table. Oh, clumsy me, I muttered. Hunter and Thorne both dove for it instinctively. It was a reflex born of impatience. They wanted that pen back in my hand as fast as possible. That was their mistake. In the 3 seconds they were bent over, fumbling under the table, my left hand moved with the precision of a piston. I had concealed a document of my own under the placemat before they arrived. It was a single sheet drafted by Alana Ross, legally binding and notarized. It was a declaration of non-liability stating that I, Reginald Carter, accepted no responsibility for the debts or financial obligations of Hunter Sullivan, and that any previous verbal agreements were null and void. With a flick of my wrist, I slid the insurance policy onto my lap and slid the declaration onto the table, aligning it perfectly with the sticky note Thorne had placed. When they popped back up red-faced and holding my pen, the landscape of the table had changed, and they hadn't noticed a thing. Thank you, boys, I wheezed, taking the pen. I squinted at the paper, pretending to focus. So this just says I am not liable for accidents, I asked. Exactly, Thorne said, sweating now. You are totally protected. I signed my name with a flourish. Reginald, a Carter. The ink flowed smooth and dark, sealing Hunter's fate. I handed the document to Thorne, who snatched it up without looking, stuffing it into his briefcase as if it were a winning lottery ticket. He didn't check it. He was too eager to get out of there to cash in his commission on a policy that didn't exist. Hunter clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to bruise. You did the right thing, Reggie, he said. Now we can fix this old place up. I smiled at him. I am sure you will fix it just the way you want it, I said. He had no idea that he had just witnessed a masterclass in negotiation. He walked Thorne to the door, celebrating a victory that was actually a total defeat. I slipped the unsigned insurance policy into my newspaper and carried it to my room. Evidence. Another nail in their coffin. That night the house was quiet, but the air was charged with anticipation. I retired to my room early, locking the door as had become my custom. I sat in my chair and turned on my tablet, accessing the feed from the hallway camera. At 2 a.m, the door to the guest room opened. Nia stepped out. She was wearing her nightgown and slippers, moving with the stealth of a cat. In her hand she held a large bottle of vegetable oil. I watched in high definition as she walked to the top of the stairs. She stood there for a moment, looking down into the darkness of the foyer. Her face was illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the window. There was no hesitation in her expression, no conflict. She looked determined. She uncapped the bottle and began to pour. The oil glugged out thick and viscous, coating the top step, then the next, then the next. She worked her way down, pouring a stream of slick death onto the hardwood treads. She was thorough. She coated the handrail too, wiping it with a cloth soaked in oil. It was a death trap designed to break hips and necks. When she was finished, she crept back to her room, closing the door softly. She was setting the stage for the accident the insurance policy was supposed to cover. She expected me to wake up early, as I always did, to make coffee. She expected me to slip, tumble, and break my neck before breakfast. I did not sleep. I sat in my chair, my boots laced tight. These were not my slippers. These were my old rail yard boots, fitted with steel cleats on the soles designed to grip ice and oil on the tracks. At 5 a.m, I opened my door. The house was silent. I walked to the stairs. I could smell the oil, a heavy kitchen scent that did not belong in the hallway. I gripped the banister, testing it. It was slick as ice. I let go. I would not need it. I stepped onto the first tread. The steel cleats bit into the wood, crunching softly, digging through the oil and anchoring me to the solid oak beneath. I walked down the stairs with a heavy, deliberate cadence. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I left marks, small indentations in the wood that would be invisible to the naked eye but proved I had traction. I reached the bottom floor safely. I walked to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I did not wipe the stairs. I did not clean up their mess. I left the trap exactly as Nia had said it. I sat at the kitchen table, drinking my coffee, waiting for the sun to rise. At 7, Hunter's alarm went off. I heard the heavy thud of his feet hitting the floor upstairs. He was in a hurry, probably anxious to check if I was dead yet, or maybe eager to call the loan sharks and tell them money was coming. He opened the bedroom door. "Reggie," he called out, his voice thick with sleep. "You up yet?" I did not answer. I heard his heavy footsteps moving toward the stairs. He was moving fast, too fast. He hit the top step. I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by the sickening sound of a shoe losing traction on wood. There was a moment of suspension, a split second of silence where gravity took hold. Then the chaos began. It sounded like a bag of wet cement being thrown down a chute. Thud, crack, smash. He hit every step on the way down. His body pinballed off the walls and the banister. He landed at the bottom of the stairs in a heap right in front of the kitchen doorway. He screamed. It was a high, ragged sound that tore through the morning. His right leg, the one that wasn't already damaged, was bent at a horrific angle halfway between the knee and the hip. The bone had snapped clean, pushing against the fabric of his pajama pants. He writhed on the floor, his hands scrabbling uselessly against the oily wood, trying to find purchase, but only sliding further. Nia appeared at the top of the stairs, screaming his name. She took one step, slipped, and caught herself on the doorframe, barely avoiding the same fate. She stared down at her husband, broken on the floor of her own trap. I stood up from the table, my coffee mug in hand. I walked to the doorway and looked down at Hunter. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with agony and confusion. "Help me," he gasped. I slipped. "It is so slippery." I took a sip of coffee. "I warned you about old houses, Hunter," I said, my voice calm. "Maintenance is everything. You really should have fixed those stairs before you tried to use them." I stepped over his broken leg, my cleats crunching on the floor, and walked to the living room to call the ambulance. For the second time in a week, I was the only one standing. For the second time in a week, the ambulance pulled away from my curb, leaving silence in its wake. Hunter was gone, screaming in agony, with a femur snapped like a dry twig. Nia went with him, her face a mask of panic and exhaustion, leaving me alone in the fortress I had reclaimed. The house felt different now. It was no longer a shared space of tension, it was my domain again. I locked the door and listened to the tumblers click into place. It was the sound of total control. I did not rest. I did not celebrate. An engineer knows that when the track is clear, you do not idle, you accelerate. I had free reign of the house for at least 24 hours. Hunter would need surgery, and Nia would have to play the role of the devoted wife to keep up appearances. This was my chance to dig deeper to find the structural rot I knew was hiding behind the drywall of their lies. I went back to the guest room, the scene of my previous discovery, but this time I was looking for something more personal than bank statements. I needed to understand the mind of the enemy. I needed to know how deep the corruption went. I began a systematic sweep of the room. I checked pockets, drawers, and the spaces behind the furniture. Under the bed, pushed all the way to the back against the wall, I found a loose floorboard. It was not a structural defect, it was a hiding place. I pried it up with the end of my cane. Inside there was a small velvet bag and a leather-bound journal. I opened the bag first, hoping against hope to find Beatrice's jewelry, but it was empty. Whatever had been inside was long gone. I opened the journal. It was Nia's handwriting, the loops and curves I had once helped her practice at the kitchen table, now spelling out a narrative of greed and resentment. I sat on the edge of the bed and began to read. It was a chronicle of their descent, entries about gambling losses, about Hunter's incompetence, about her own vanity. But then I turned a page dated 2 years ago and my heart stopped. It was an entry about the day I thought I had lost my grandfather's labor medal. It was a bronze medallion awarded to him for 50 years of service on the rail lines, a symbol of our family's blood and sweat. I thought I had misplaced it during spring cleaning. I had torn the house apart looking for it, grieving the loss of my history. The entry read simply, "Hunter took the old man's medal today. We pawned it at the shop on Decatur Street. Got $400. Bought a bottle of champagne and dinner at Chops. It was too easy. He thinks he lost it. He is getting so old." I stared at the words, my vision blurring, not with tears, but with a red-hot fury. They had not just stolen money. They had stolen my legacy. They had traded my grandfather's lifetime of labor for a single night of luxury. That medal represented the struggle of a black man in a time when the railroad was the only path forward. It was sacred. And they had sold it for champagne. I closed the book, my hands trembling with a rage so cold it burned. I stood up. I had an errand to run. I drove my old sedan to Decatur Street, parking in front of a shop with bars on the windows and a sign that read, "We buy gold cash fast." I walked in the bell above the door, announcing my arrival. The air smelled of dust and desperation. A man sat behind the glass counter, thick-necked and suspicious, eyeing my suit and my cane. I did not waste time. 2 years ago, a man and a woman sold you a bronze railroad medal, I said, my voice filling the small space. It has the name Jeremiah Carter engraved on the back. I want it back. The man laughed, a dry hacking sound. 2 years ago, Pops, that is long gone. Probably melted down or sold to a collector. I do not keep inventory that long. I leaned against the counter, looking him in the eye. I know you kept it, I said. It is unique. You knew it was worth more than melt value. You still have it. I am not leaving until I see it. He stared at me, assessing the threat. He saw the cut of my suit, the set of my jaw. He realized I was not a desperate junkie looking for a fix. I was a man on a mission. He grunted and disappeared into the back room. He returned 5 minutes later holding a small plastic bag. Inside was the dull bronze glint of my history. My heart leaped. It was still there. Survived the purge just like me. That is a rare piece, he said, his greed showing in his eyes. Collector's item. I can't let it go for cheap. I pulled out the envelope of cash I kept in the lining of my boot. $5,000, I said, placing the stack on the counter. That is 10 times what you paid for it. Take it and give me my name back. The man's eyes widened. He snatched the cash, counting it quickly with practiced thumbs. Deal, he said, sliding the medal under the glass. I took it out of the bag. The medal was cold and heavy in my palm. I ran my thumb over the engraving. Jeremiah Carter. I felt the weight of my grandfather's sacrifice, the years of laying track under the burning sun, so that I could become an engineer, so that I could buy a house, so that my daughter could sell his memory for a steak dinner. I walked out of that shop clutching the medal like a lifeline. I had bought back my past, but the price was the final shred of love I held for my daughter. There was no coming back from this. I returned home and sat at the kitchen table, the medal placed in the center like an accusation. I opened the journal again. I needed to finish reading. I needed to know if there were any more secrets waiting to detonate. I flipped to the most recent entries. The writing was jagged, hurried. It spoke of the loan sharks of Rico of the deadline. And then I found the entry from last week. It was written in shaky ink stained with what looked like a tear. Hunter thinks the baby is his. He is so happy. He thinks it is a sign we should turn our lives around. But I know the dates. I know what I had to do to get Rico to extend the loan last month. It is not Hunter's. It is Rico's. If Hunter finds out, he will kill me. If Rico finds out, he will own me. I need the inheritance now. I need to pay Rico off and disappear before the baby shows. I sat back in my chair, the breath knocked out of me. Nia was pregnant. My daughter was bringing a child into this world. But it was not a grandchild born of love or even of a misguided marriage. It was a child born of a transaction. She had traded her body to a loan shark to buy time on a debt incurred by her husband's gambling. And now she was planning to kill her father to cover up her infidelity and buy her freedom. The level of moral bankruptcy was absolute. There was no bottom to this well. Hunter was a fool and a criminal, but even he did not know he was being cuckolded by the man threatening to break his legs. Nia was playing everyone. She was the architect of this entire disaster, spinning a web of lies so complex it was strangling her. I closed the journal. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The woman who wrote this was not the girl I walked to school. She was a stranger, a parasite willing to consume everything in her path to survive. I looked at the medal, then at the journal. I had the past, and I had the truth. Now I had the weapon to end the war. The invitations Nia sent out claimed we were celebrating my 73rd birthday, but anyone who actually knew me or cared enough to check a calendar would know that my birthday is in November, and it was currently the middle of August. But facts were no longer relevant in my house. Nia needed a stage, and she needed an audience. She had invited everyone who mattered in our local community. Pastor Lewis from the Ebenezer Baptist Church was there holding a plate of deviled eggs, Mrs. Higgins, the president of the neighborhood watch, was judging the dust on the baseboards. Even old Mr. Henderson, who owned 3 car dealerships and had more money than sense, was present. They were not here to celebrate me. They were here to be witnesses. Nia needed the pillars of the community to see her father in his state of decline. She needed them to nod sadly and agree that yes, perhaps a facility would be best for poor Reginald. It was a social court of law, and she was the prosecutor painting a portrait of a man whose mind had turned to mush. I sat in the corner of the living room, slumped in my recliner, wearing a stained cardigan Nia had forced onto me. She had taken my glasses, so the room was a blur of shapes and colors, but I did not need to see clearly to understand the game. I stared at the wall, letting my mouth hang open slightly occasionally, muttering nonsense words about train schedules and coal pressure. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. My pride screamed at me to stand up, to straighten my back, to tell Mrs. Higgins that I knew more about structural engineering than she knew about gossip. But I held my tongue. I let them look at me with that suffocating mixture of pity and discomfort. I was the prop in Nia's tragedy. She moved through the room wearing a modest dress that looked nothing like her usual flashy attire, playing the role of the exhausted saint. She guided guests over to me, speaking in a hushed, sorrowful tone. "He has good days and bad days," she told Pastor Lewis, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "Today is a bad day. He does not even know where he is. We try so hard, Pastor, but it is overwhelming. Hunter and I have sacrificed everything to be here for him, but we are running out of resources. We want to keep him home, but without financial help or professional care, we just don't know if it is safe anymore." The pastor patted her hand, his face full of sympathy. "You are doing the Lord's work, Sister Nia," he said. "It is a heavy burden to bear the parent who once bore you. If you need the church to sign any character references for the guardianship hearing, you just let us know." I gripped the armrest of my chair. She was good. She was harvesting their sympathy and converting it into leverage. She was priming them so that when she threw me into a state-run facility and sold my house, nobody would ask questions. They would just shake their heads and say it was for the best. While Nia worked the room with her sob story, Hunter was operating his own angle. He was parked near the buffet table, his leg propped up in a cast that was already gray with grime. He looked terrible. His skin was pasty and he was sweating profusely despite the air conditioning. The pain from his broken femur was clearly agonizing, but the fear of Rico the loan shark was stronger. He had cornered Mr. Henderson and was leaning in close, speaking with a frantic, manic energy. I tuned my hearing, focusing on their conversation through the din of the party. Hunter was pitching a real estate development deal. It was a phantom project, a completely fabricated investment opportunity involving luxury condos in a part of town that was currently a swamp. Look, Mr. Henderson, this is ground floor stuff, Hunter said, his voice shaking. I have the permits lined up. I just need a bridge loan to break ground. $25,000 gets you in. Guaranteed 40% return in 6 months. It is a sure thing. I watched Henderson. He was a businessman. He knew the smell of desperation, and Hunter reeked of it. Henderson took a step back, clutching his drink. That sounds interesting, son, he said, his tone non-committal. But the market is tight right now. I don't have that kind of liquid cash available. Hunter grabbed Henderson's sleeve. I can do 30% equity, he hissed, his eyes darting around the room to see if Rico's enforcers had crashed the party. Cash. I need cash today. I can sign the papers right now. Henderson pulled his arm away, looking at Hunter with distaste. I will think about it, he said, walking away quickly. Hunter slammed his fist onto the armrest of his wheelchair, mouthing a curse. He was drowning. He had thought this party would be a fundraising event, a place to fleece my friends and neighbors to pay off his debts. But he was failing. He looked over at Nia and shook his head. They were running out of options. The walls were closing in and they were about to get desperate. That was my cue. I waited until the cake was brought out. It was a sheet cake from the grocery store with Happy 73rd printed in runny icing. Nia clinked a spoon against a glass, calling for silence. Everyone gathered around, looking at the old man in the corner. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. It means so much to us to have your support during this difficult transition. We love Dad so much and we just want him to be at peace. We are going to cut the cake now, but first I think Hunter wanted to say a few words. She gestured to her husband. Hunter wheeled himself to the center of the room. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. Yes, he said. We are facing some hard choices. We might have to sell the house to pay for Reggie's care. If anyone knows interested buyers or wants to help the family out, we would appreciate it. It was a blatant beg, a humiliating public plea for cash disguised as a eulogy for my sanity. I stood up. I did not struggle to rise. I did not use the cane. I pushed myself up from the recliner with a smooth, powerful motion. I stood to my full height of 6'2", my spine straight as a steel rail. The room went silent. I reached into the pocket of the cardigan and pulled out my glasses, putting them on with a deliberate, slow movement. Then I took off the stained cardigan, dropping it onto the floor like a discarded rag. Underneath, I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. I looked immaculate. I looked powerful. I looked nothing like the invalid they had been describing for the last 2 hours. I walked to the center of the room, moving with a steady, menacing grace. The guests parted for me, their eyes wide with confusion. Nia froze the knife hovering over the cake. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Hunter gripped the wheels of his chair, his knuckles white, his face draining of blood. He looked like he had seen a ghost. I walked right up to them. I took the microphone from the stand near the television, which Nia had been using for background music. I tapped it once. The sound echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the space without a tremor. I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate a birthday that is actually 3 months away. It is rare to see one's own wake while still breathing. I looked at Pastor Lewis, who looked as if he might faint. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was now watching me with keen interest. Then I turned my gaze to Nia and Hunter. They were paralyzed. The narrative they had built, the story of the senile, helpless father, had just shattered into a million pieces. They were looking at the man who used to run entire rail yards with a look and a word. My daughter says she wants peace for me. I continued walking slowly around Hunter's wheelchair, circling him like a predator. My son-in-law says he needs to sell my house to pay for my care. They have told you that I am confused, that I am a burden, that I am broke. I stopped directly in front of them, blocking their view of the guests. Well, I have a surprise for them, and for you. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. Nia flinched, thinking I was pulling a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out a USB drive and held it up for the room to see. It glinted under the chandelier lights, a small silver object that contained their destruction. I have a gift for my children, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. A gift of truth. I walked over to the large smart television mounted on the wall, the one Hunter had bought with my stolen credit card. I plugged the drive into the side. The screen flickered to life. I turned back to the room, my eyes locking with Nia's. You wanted everyone to know who I am, Nia. You wanted them to see the reality of this family. Well, let us show them. Let us show them exactly what you have been doing in the dark while you thought the old man was sleeping." The screen flickered to life, bathing the room in a cold digital light that contrasted sharply with the warm glow of the chandelier. The first image was high-definition, crisp, and undeniable. It was the kitchen. It was Sunday. The timestamp in the corner read 5:43 p.m. Every guest in the room turned their attention to the television, expecting perhaps a montage of old family photos or a sentimental tribute to my late wife Beatrice. Instead, they saw Naya. She was standing at the stove, looking over her shoulder with the furtive, nervous energy of a criminal. The camera angle hidden in the molding above the cabinets provided a perfect view of her hands. The room watched in stunned silence as my daughter pulled the blue vial from her apron pocket. The audio was perfect, picked up by the sensitive microphone I had installed. The clink of the glass against the ceramic bowl rang out through the speakers. They watched her pour the poison. They watched her stir it. They watched her smile, that fake plastic smile that she had been wearing all evening. Then the scene cut. It was a new angle, this one from the camera inside the smoke detector in the hallway. It was night. The house was dark, but the night vision turned everything into a ghostly green. Nia and Hunter were standing at the top of the stairs. Hunter was leaning on the banister, his face twisted in a sneer. "He won't survive the fall." Hunter's voice boomed through the living room speakers. "He is frail, Nia. One slip, and it is over." The guests gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. On the screen, Nia nodded, handing Hunter the bottle of oil. "Just make sure it looks like an accident," she whispered. "We need that insurance money before the end of the month." The video cut again. This time it was the living room just 2 days ago. Hunter was sitting in his wheelchair laughing. "That useless old man," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "He is just taking up space. Once we put him in the home, we can sell this dump and be done with it. I hope he rots in there." I paused the video. The freeze frame held Hunter's laughing face on the screen, a grotesque mask of greed and malice. I turned back to the room. The silence was absolute, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was heavy, suffocating, and charged with electricity. Pastor Lewis had dropped his plate of deviled eggs. They lay scattered on the carpet, a mess of yellow and white, but he did not seem to notice. His hand was over his mouth, his eyes wide with horror. Mrs. Higgins looked as if she had been slapped. She was staring at Naya with an expression of pure revulsion. The veneer of the respectable, loving daughter had not just cracked, it had been obliterated. Nia stood frozen by the cake table, the knife still in her hand. She looked small. She looked naked. All her lies, all her careful manipulations were stripped away, leaving only the ugly truth for everyone to see. Then the noise began. It started as a low murmur, a rumble of disbelief that quickly escalated into a roar of outrage. These were church people. These were neighbors who believed in honoring thy father and mother. They had just watched a daughter poison her father's soup and plot his murder. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Higgins shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Naya. "You are a devil. You are a devil in a dress." Mr. Henderson, the car dealer, shook his head, his face grim. "I have seen some low things in my life, son," he said to Hunter, his voice cutting through the noise. "But trying to kill the man who put a roof over your head, that is a special kind of evil." Hunter tried to speak. He waved his hands frantically, trying to regain control of the narrative. "It is deepfake," he stammered, his voice high and panic-stricken. "It is AI. He made it up. He is crazy." But nobody was listening. The evidence was too raw, too specific. The audio captured the intimate cadence of their cruelty. You could not fake the hatred in their eyes on that screen. Pastor Lewis stepped forward, his face set in a line of righteous judgment. He did not look at Naya. He looked at me. "Brother Carter," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed anger, "I apologize. We did not know. We truly did not know." I raised my hand and the room fell silent again. They were waiting for me to speak, to rage, to scream. But I did not scream. I was done with screaming. I walked over to the table where Nia had piled the gifts she expected me to open. I pushed them aside with my cane, clearing a space. Then I reached into my briefcase, which I had placed under the table before the party began. I pulled out a thick stack of papers bound with a heavy rubber band. I held them up. "You wanted my money," I said, my voice calm and cold, addressing Nia and Hunter directly. "You killed my peace for money. You tried to kill me for money. You sold my grandfather's metal for money. You thought I was a poor retired rail worker with a pension and a paid-off house. You thought that was all I was. I tossed the stack of papers onto the table. They landed with a heavy thud sliding across the polished wood until they stopped right in front of Hunter's wheelchair. "Pick it up," I commanded. Hunter looked at the papers, then at me. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grasp the top sheet. He lifted it. It was a consolidated bank statement from the Cayman Islands dated yesterday. He read the balance line. His eyes bulged. His mouth fell open. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw genuine awe mixed with his terror. $8.5 million, he whispered. The room went dead silent again. Nia snatched the paper from his hand. She read the number. She read it again. She looked at me and her knees gave out. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. "Dad," she choked out. $8 million. Where? How? I saved, I said simply. I invested. I bought land in the 70s when nobody wanted it. I bought stocks when the market crashed. I lived simply because I did not need to show off. I was building a legacy I intended to share with my family. I watched the realization wash over them. The greed in their eyes was so intense it was almost palpable. They were doing the math. They were realizing that their debts, their loan sharks, their petty little problems could all be solved with a stroke of my pen. They were realizing that they had tried to kill the golden goose for a few golden eggs when I could have given them the whole farm if they had just been decent human beings. Hunter started to cry. It was a pathetic weeping sound. "Reggie, please," he begged, reaching out a hand toward me. We did not know. We were desperate. "We can fix this. We can be a family. We can start over. With $8 million, we can get the best care for you. We can buy a big house for all of us." He was still trying to hustle. He was still trying to find an angle. He saw the money and he forgot the video. He forgot the poison. He forgot the shame. I smiled. It was a smile that did not reach my eyes. "You are right, Hunter," I said. $8.5 million can do a lot of good. It can build schools. It can feed the hungry. It can change lives. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out one last piece of paper. It was a single sheet, a wire transfer confirmation receipt. I unfolded it slowly, smoothing the crease with my thumb. I held it up for them to see. "But it won't do you any good," I said. "Because at 9 o'clock this morning, right before I put on this suit, I transferred every single cent of that $8.5 million to the Beatrice Carter Charitable Foundation. The account is empty. The house is already in a trust managed by the foundation. I own nothing. You inherit nothing." Nia let out a scream that sounded like an animal in a trap. She lunged for the transfer receipt, but I pulled it back. "Gone," I said. "All of it. You tried to kill a millionaire, Nia, but you failed. And now you are just the daughter of a broke old man. And you are also homeless because the foundation is putting this house on the market on Monday. Get out." The news of my donation traveled faster than a wildfire in a dry forest. By the time the last guest stumbled out of my front door clutching their pearls and whispering about the scandal, the deed was done. I had not just exposed them to the neighborhood, I had exposed them to the streets. Hunter sat in his wheelchair in the middle of the ruined living room staring at his phone with the dead eyes of a man watching his execution date arrive. His phone was blowing up. It was not vibrating with messages of support or shock. It was vibrating with threats. The guests had tweeted about the scene. They had posted on community forums. They had called their friends to gossip about the millionaire rail engineer who gave it all away to spite his children. The headline was simple and devastating. Local man donates $8 million to charity, leaving scheming family destitute. It was the kind of human interest story people love to share, but for Hunter, it was a death sentence. Rico, the man who held Hunter's debt, did not need a press release to understand what had happened. He had been waiting for Friday because Friday was supposed to be payday. Friday was when Hunter promised the inheritance would be secured and the high-interest loans would be settled. But now everyone in Atlanta knew the vault was empty. Hunter looked at me, his face the color of old ash. "He knows," he whispered, his voice trembling so hard the words barely came out. "Rico knows." I just poured myself a cup of tea from the pot I had brewed amidst the chaos. "Of course he knows," I said, blowing on the steam. "I made sure the press release went out at 5 this afternoon. The world knows you are broke, Hunter. And more importantly, they know you have no future prospects. You are a bad investment, and loan sharks know when to cut their losses. Darkness settled over the house like a heavy shroud. Nia was in the kitchen sobbing into a dish towel, trying to call lawyers who wouldn't answer at midnight without a retainer she didn't have. Hunter was shivering in the living room, refusing to go near the windows, clutching a kitchen knife in his lap, as if that would stop what was coming. I sat on the porch in the humid Atlanta air, rocking in my favorite chair, waiting. I knew they would come. Men like Rico do not write off bad debts, they make examples of them. At 2 a.m, a black SUV screeched to a halt on the lawn, tearing up the grass I had tended for 40 years. I did not flinch. 3 men got out. They were not wearing masks. They did not care about witnesses because they knew Hunter wouldn't talk. They kicked in the front door with a single violent crash that shook the foundations of the house. I heard Nia scream, a high piercing sound of pure terror. I heard the sound of furniture overturning and glass breaking. Then I heard Hunter begging, "Please, no, I can get the money, I swear, just give me a week." It was pathetic. They dragged him out onto the front porch. One man held him by his collar while the other kicked the wheelchair down the steps, sending it clattering into the bushes. Hunter screamed as they threw him onto the concrete walkway. His cast cracked against the pavement. They did not touch Nia. Their business was strictly with the debtor. The lead man, a giant with a scar running down his cheek, looked at me sitting in the shadows. He nodded once, a grim acknowledgement of my presence, then turned back to Hunter. "You lied to Rico," the man said calmly. "You said the old man was dying. You said the money was locked. It looks like the old man is just fine." Then he began to work. It was precise and brutal. They targeted his good leg. They targeted his ribs. It was not a fight. It was a transaction being settled in bone and blood. Nia scrambled out the front door, her hands covered in her husband's blood. She looked at the men beating the father of the child she claimed was his. Then she looked at me. "Dad, do something," she screamed, her voice tearing her throat. "Pay them. You have the money. You can stop this. Give them whatever they want." She grabbed my arm, shaking me, trying to rouse the father who used to fix her scraped knees. But that father was gone. He died when she poured poison into his soup. I pulled my arm away from her grip and took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. It was chamomile, calming and sweet. I looked down at her, my eyes dry and hard as flint. "I do not have the money, Nia," I said, my voice steady over the sound of Hunter's groans. "I gave it away, and even if I had it, I would not give it to them." "Why?" she shrieked, falling to her knees and clutching my pant leg. "Because he is family." "No, he is not," I replied. "He is the man who plotted to push me down a cliff. He is the man who gambled away my grandfather's medal. He is the man who looked me in the eye and waited for me to die so he could pay off his gambling debts." I looked at Hunter curled in a fetal position on the walkway, coughing blood. I would rather stack $8 million in the driveway and set it on fire than give a single penny to save the man who tried to murder me. "This is not my debt, Nia. It is yours. You wanted to be grown-ups. You wanted to make big moves. Well, this is the big league, and you just struck out." Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the humid night air. The men stopped immediately. They were professionals, and professionals do not get caught. The leader spat on Hunter one last time. "This isn't over," he whispered. Then they ran to the SUV and sped away, disappearing into the darkness just as the blue lights of the police cruisers flooded the street. I had called Detective Johnson 10 minutes before they arrived. I knew the timing had to be perfect. I wanted Hunter to feel the consequences before the law stepped in. The officers ran up the driveway, guns drawn. They found Hunter broken and bleeding on the concrete. Paramedics rushed in behind them. As they loaded him onto a stretcher for the second time in a week, Detective Johnson walked up to the porch. He looked at Hunter, then at me. "Rough night, Mr. Carter," he said. I nodded. "Just cleaning house, Detective," I replied. He walked over to the stretcher where they were stabilizing Hunter. "Hunter Sullivan," he said to the moaning man, "you are under arrest for real estate fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. We will patch you up at the hospital, but you are handcuffed to the bed." Hunter looked at me, one swollen eye open. I lifted my teacup in a silent toast. The red taillights of the ambulance carrying Hunter faded into the distance, leaving a silence that felt heavy and final. Nia stood on the porch, shivering in the humid night air, hugging herself as if trying to hold her shattering world together. She turned to me expecting comfort, expecting the father she had manipulated for years to step in and fix the mess. But I just stood there leaning on my cane, watching her with the impassive gaze of a judge who has already signed the verdict. Detective Johnson did not leave with the ambulance. He stayed behind, stepping onto the porch with 2 uniformed officers flanking him. Nia wiped her tears and tried to compose herself, putting on the mask of the traumatized victim. "Detective," she said, her voice trembling, "thank you for saving us. Those men were going to kill him." Johnson looked at her, his face unreadable. "We are looking into the assault, Mrs. Sullivan," he said. "But right now we need to discuss another matter. We need to discuss the clam chowder." Nia froze. The color that had returned to her face drained away instantly, leaving her gray and sickly. "What chowder?" she whispered. "The chowder that sent your husband to the emergency room with a lethal dose of horse tranquilizer," Johnson replied. "We analyzed the sample from the trash can," Mr. Carter pointed out. "We found the vial, and we found your fingerprints all over it." Nia opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The air around her seemed to vibrate with the weight of her guilt. "You are not under arrest yet," Johnson continued, his voice hard. "But we are detaining you for questioning regarding the attempted murder of Reginald Carter and the poisoning of Hunter Sullivan. I suggest you come with us quietly." They did not handcuff her, but they might as well have. They placed her in the back of the cruiser, caging her like an animal. I watched her go. I did not feel sadness. I felt the cold satisfaction of a mathematical equation finally balancing out. I got into my own car and followed them to the precinct. I had one last piece of evidence to deliver. The interrogation room was a box of gray concrete and fluorescent light designed to break the human spirit. I sat behind the one-way glass in the observation room, watching my daughter unravel. In the adjacent room, watching on a monitor, was Hunter. They had patched him up at the hospital, drugged him for the pain, and dragged him in for a statement before booking him. He looked like a broken doll sitting in his wheelchair, handcuffed to the table, his face swollen and purple from the beating. Detective Johnson moved between the 2 rooms, playing them like a maestro conducting a symphony of betrayal. He started with Nia. He placed a photo of the blue vial on the table. "Your husband says it was your idea," Nia Johnson lied smoothly. "He says you bought the drugs online. He says you cooked the soup. He says he tried to stop you, but you threatened to leave him." Nia snapped. Her eyes bulged, and she slammed her hand on the table. "He is a liar," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "He bought the drugs. He knows the vet. He gambles with him. It was his plan. He said Dad was old and useless. He said nobody would miss him. I just wanted to move to a nice house. I did not want to hurt anyone. Hunter made me do it. He said he would leave me with the debt if I didn't help." She was throwing him under the bus without hesitation. The love she professed, the partnership they had built, it was all dust. Behind the glass, I watched her face contorted with ugliness and fear. She was not sorry she tried to kill me. She was sorry she got caught. Johnson walked into the other room where Hunter was watching the feed of his wife betraying him. His jaw worked silently. He looked up at the detective, his one good eye filled with hatred. "She is lying," Hunter rasped. "She is the one who wanted the money. She is the one who is pregnant with another man's baby." I leaned forward in the observation room. Hunter knew. He finally knew. Johnson raised an eyebrow. "She told me to put the oil on the stairs." Hunter continued, spitting blood onto the metal table. "She told me to push the old man off the cliff. She said he was taking too long to die. She is the monster. I was just the muscle. It was a race to the bottom, and they were neck and neck. They were tearing each other apart, confessing to crimes the police didn't even know about yet, just to shave a few years off their own sentences. It was pathetic. It was vile. And it was exactly what I expected." Johnson walked back into Nia's room. He looked tired. He sat down and leaned forward. "You both tell a good story, Mrs. Sullivan," he said. "You blame him. He blames you. But here's the problem. Attempted murder requires intent. And right now, it looks like a conspiracy where you are both equally guilty. Unless we have proof of who was the mastermind, you are both going down for 20 years. Nia began to sob. "It wasn't me," she wailed. "I loved my father. I would never hurt him. I was coerced. I am a victim here. That was my cue." I tapped on the glass. Johnson looked up and nodded. He opened the door, and I walked into the interrogation room. Nia looked up. Her face streaked with mascara, hope flaring in her eyes for a brief second. "Dad," she breathed. Tell them I am a good daughter." I didn't say a word. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I connected it to the Bluetooth speaker on the table. I scrolled through my files until I found the recording from 3 weeks ago, the one I captured the day after I installed the microphones. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. Nia's voice filled the small room, sharp and impatient. "Why won't he just die?" she was saying on the recording. "That old man is living too long. He's like a cockroach. If the soup doesn't work, we have to use the pillow. I can't wait another month, Hunter. I need that money now." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier than the grave. Nia stared at the phone as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. Her face went slack. Her defense of coercion, her plea of innocence, her entire narrative evaporated into thin air. It was her voice, her words, her malice. She looked at me, and for the first time she didn't see a father or a victim. She saw the engineer. She saw the man who had laid the trap and watched her walk right into it. I turned off the phone and put it back in my pocket. "That sounds like intent to me," I said calmly, looking at Detective Johnson. Nia put her head on the table and began to scream a raw, guttural sound of total defeat. She knew it was over. The door opened again and Alana Ross walked in. She was wearing a power suit that cost more than Hunter's car used to cost carrying a briefcase that contained the rest of their lives. She did not look at Nia. She looked at the detective and then at me. "We have a proposal," she said, her voice crisp and professional. She sat down opposite Nia, opening a file. "Miss Carter." She began using Nia's maiden name, a subtle reminder that she had lost her status as a wife and a daughter. "The district attorney is willing to offer a deal based on the evidence Mr. Carter has provided." Nia lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. "A deal," she whispered. Alana nodded. "You plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. You accept a sentence of 10 years in a federal facility. You allocate any future assets to the restitution of the funds you stole from your father, and you sign away your parental rights to the child you are carrying to a state guardian immediately upon birth." Nia gasped. "My baby," she cried. "You can't take my baby." "You are going to prison," Nia, Alana said coldly. "You will give birth in chains. That child deserves a chance, and it won't get one with you. If you refuse the deal, we go to trial. With the video, the audio, and Hunter's testimony, you are looking at 25 years to life, and you will still lose the baby. It is your choice. 10 years or a lifetime." Nia looked at me. "Dad, please," she begged. "Help me." I stood up, leaning on my cane, preparing to leave the room and her life forever. "I helped you for 32 years, Nia," I said. "I gave you a home. I gave you an education. I gave you love, and you tried to give me a funeral. You made your choice when you poured that poison. Now you have to live with it." I turned my back on her screams and walked out of the station. The air outside was cool and fresh. I took a deep breath. I was tired. I was old. But I was alive. And I was free. The gavel struck the wood block with a sharp finality that echoed in my mind long after the courtroom had emptied. 10 years. That was the price of a daughter's betrayal. The judicial system moved on to the next case, but I was left standing in the wreckage of what used to be my life. I drove home in silence, the engine of my sedan the only sound in a world that had suddenly gone mute. When I unlocked the front door, the house greeted me not with warmth but with a hollow echo. The air was stale, filled with the lingering ghosts of the last 6 months. Hunter's wheelchair tracks were still faint scuffs on the hardwood. The smell of Nia's vanilla perfume still clung to the curtains, a cloying reminder of the woman who had smiled while she poisoned me. I walked through the rooms listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock. It was just me now. No enemies, no family. Just an old man in a house that was too big and memories that were too sharp. I sat in my armchair, and for the first time in 40 years I felt the crushing weight of absolute solitude. I had won the war, but the victory felt like ash in my mouth. There was no parade. There was only the task of cleaning up the debris. I realized then that hate can sustain a man for a long time, but once the object of that hate is gone, you are left with nothing but the void it occupied. I decided to purge the house immediately. I could not sleep another night with their things under my roof. I grabbed a box of heavy-duty trash bags and marched to the guest room. I did not sort. I did not donate. I threw everything into the black plastic abyss. Hunter's cheap suits, Nia's flashy dresses, the shoes, the magazines, the remnants of their parasitic existence. I stripped the bed, throwing the sheets they had slept on into the trash. I wanted to scrub the walls. I wanted to tear up the floorboards. As I was clearing out the nightstand on Nia's side of the bed, My hand brushed against something taped to the underside of the drawer. It was not money or drugs. It was an envelope yellowed with age and soft to the touch. I peeled the tape away and recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Beatrice's script, elegant and flowing. The letter was sealed, but the seal had been broken. Nia had opened it. Nia had read it. I sat on the bare mattress, my hands trembling as I pulled the letter out. It was dated 5 years ago, 2 weeks before Beatrice passed. My dearest Nia, it began. I am writing this because I know my time is short. Your father is a strong man. He is stubborn and he is proud like the steel he used to work with. But steel gets brittle when it is cold. When I am gone, he will be lonely, even if he never says it. He will need you, Nia. He will need his daughter to be his warmth. Please promise me you will look after him. Not for his money, because money is just paper, but for his heart. He loves you more than he loves himself. Do not let the world harden you, my sweet girl. Take care of him, and he will always take care of you. Love, Mom. I read the words and felt a physical blow to my chest that was harder than any hammer swing. Nia had this letter. She had carried it with her. She had read her mother's dying wish, a plea for love and care, and she had used it as a map for exploitation. Beatrice had asked her to be my warmth, and instead she had tried to be my executioner. The cruelty was so profound it stole the breath from my lungs. She knew. She knew exactly how much she was loved, and she chose to monetize it. She looked at this letter and saw weakness, not affection. She saw an opportunity to manipulate a grieving man. I crushed the letter in my fist, the paper crinkling loudly in the empty room. This was the final proof. There was no misunderstanding. There was no desperation. There was only a soul so rotted by greed that even a mother's dying love could not save it. I drove to the cemetery as the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The iron gates were open, and I drove slowly to the plot under the old oak tree where Beatrice rested. The grass was green and manicured, a sharp contrast to the chaos of my life. I got out of the car, leaning on my cane, the letter burning a hole in my pocket. I stood over her grave, tracing her name on the cold granite. I missed her with a ferocity that brought me to my knees. I missed her wisdom. I missed her kindness. I missed the way she would have known exactly what to say to stop this before it started. But she was gone, and I was here holding the evidence of our failure. I pulled the letter out and smoothed it against the stone. I could not keep it. To keep it would be to honor a lie. Nia had forfeited the right to these words the moment she bought the poison. I took a silver lighter from my pocket, the one Beatrice gave me for our 25th anniversary. I flicked the wheel and the flame danced in the twilight. I held the corner of the envelope to the fire. The paper caught quickly, curling black and orange. I watched the handwriting disappear, the words of love turning into smoke and ash. I am sorry, B. I whispered, my voice cracking in the quiet air. I tried. I gave her everything we had. But she did not want our love. She wanted our life. You asked her to take care of me, and she tried to bury me next to you. I let the burning paper fall onto the dirt, watching it crumble until it was nothing but gray dust. The wind picked it up and scattered it across the grass. It is done, I said to the stone. She chose the devil bee, and I had to send her to hell to save myself. Forgive me. I stood there for a long time until the stars came out, feeling the heat of the fire fade from my hands, leaving them cold and empty. The next morning, I was sitting on my porch, staring blankly at the street, when a small, reliable sedan pulled into my driveway. It was not a police cruiser or a lawyer's town car. It was a Honda, dusty and practical. A young woman stepped out. It was Maya, the social worker who had been assigned to handle the case of Nia's unborn child and assist with the elder abuse investigation. She was young, barely 30, with bright, intelligent eyes and a demeanor that radiated a quiet strength. She carried a file folder, but she did not walk with the officious stride of a bureaucrat. She walked like a neighbor. "Mr. Carter," she called out as she approached the porch. "I hope I am not disturbing you." I didn't answer immediately. I was tired of people. I was tired of files and questions. But Maya didn't wait for an invitation. She walked up the steps and sat in the rocking chair next to mine. She didn't open the file. She just looked at me. "I checked on the house listing," she said softly. "I saw you put it on the market." I nodded. "Too much space," I said. "Too many ghosts." She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I understand. But I also came to tell you something else. The DA told me about the donation, the Beatrice Carter Foundation. That was an incredible thing you did. Most people would have bought a yacht. I looked at her. I don't like boats, I grunted. Maya laughed. Well, I work with a lot of kids, Mr. Carter. Kids in the system. Kids who age out of foster care and have nowhere to go. They are smart and they are tough, but they don't have anyone in their corner. They don't have a legacy. I looked at her properly, then seeing the fire in her eyes. It reminded me of Beatrice. What are you proposing, Maya? I asked. She leaned forward. You have resources, Mr. Carter. But more importantly, you have experience. You know how to build things. You know how to spot a crack in the foundation. I have students who need scholarships, yes, but they also need a mentor. They need someone to teach them that character matters more than currency. I think you need a new project, and I think they need you. I looked at the empty street, then at Maya. A new track, a new line. It wasn't a family, but it was a start. 6 months later, I was standing on the balcony of my new penthouse watching the sun dip below the Atlanta skyline. The view was panoramic, a sweeping vista of glass and steel that was a world away from the humid, tree-lined street I had lived on for 4 decades. I had sold the old house. The foundation took care of the details, selling it to a developer who bulldozed it within a week. I watched the demolition from my car, feeling a strange sense of relief as the walls crumbled. The memories, the ghosts, the lingering smell of betrayal were all buried under tons of red Georgia clay. I did not mourn. I had simply moved my station. My new apartment was a testament to the life I had denied myself. Marble floors, high ceilings, and a kitchen equipped for a chef, though I still made my own simple meals. I wore tailored suits every day now, not because I had to, but because I respected the man in the mirror. I had kept enough of my fortune to live like a king for the rest of my days. The Beatrice Carter Foundation was thriving, funded by the bulk of my wealth, but my personal accounts were still robust enough to ensure I would never have to worry about the price of gas or the cost of a good bottle of wine. I was 72, but I felt younger than I had at 60. The weight of deception was gone, replaced by the buoyancy of freedom. My mornings were no longer filled with dread or suspicion. They were filled with purpose. I drove my new sedan, a sleek German model that purred like a contented cat, to the community center where Maya had set up her office. I was not just a donor, I was a participant. I sat in a classroom filled with young faces, kids from the foster system, kids who had been told their whole lives that they were statistics. I taught them about engineering, about the physics of tension and compression, but mostly I taught them about resilience. I showed them how to read a blueprint and how to design a life that could withstand a storm. They called me Mr. Reggie. They listened to me. They asked me questions not about my money, but about my life. There was a boy named Marcus, 18 years old, sharp as a tack, but angry at the world. He reminded me of myself at that age. I took him under my wing. I showed him how to tie a Windsor knot. I helped him fill out college applications. When he got his acceptance letter to Georgia Tech, he didn't ask me for a car. He shook my hand and looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you." That handshake was worth more than any Father's Day card I had ever received from Nia. It was honest. It was earned. I realized then that family is not about DNA. It is about shared values. It is about showing up. I had built a new family from scratch, brick by brick, just like I had built my career. But the past has a way of trying to claw its way back into the present. It came in the form of a collect call on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my study reviewing scholarship applications when my phone rang. The caller ID read State Correctional Facility. I knew who it was. I could have let it go to voicemail. I could have blocked the number then and there. But curiosity is a powerful force, and perhaps a small part of me wanted to hear the sound of consequences. I accepted the call. Dad Nia's voice came through the line, tinny and distorted by the prison system's recording software. It sounded small, stripped of its usual arrogance. I waited. I did not say hello. I just listened to her breathe. "Dad, are you there?" she asked, a tremor of panic in her tone. "I am here, Nia," I said, my voice flat. "What do you want?" "I need money," she rushed to say the words, tumbling out in a desperate stream. "The commissary is expensive, Dad. I need shampoo. I need stamps. The food here is terrible. I am losing weight. Please just put a few $100s in my account. It is not much for you. You have millions. You live in a penthouse now. I saw it on the news. You can afford it." She hadn't changed. Not really. She was still counting my money. She still felt entitled to it. She wasn't calling to apologize. She wasn't calling to ask how I was. She was calling because she was hungry and she thought I was still her ATM. She thought that time and distance would soften me, that her suffering would trigger my guilt. But she forgot who she was talking to. She was talking to the engineer. And an engineer knows that you do not patch a leak in a dam, you condemn the structure. I leaned back in my leather chair looking out at the city lights. "You want money, Naya?" I asked. "Yes, please," she cried. "Just a little." "Okay," I said. "Here is what you do. The foundation has a scholarship program. It is open to anyone, even inmates who show a genuine desire for rehabilitation. Fill out an application. Write an essay about personal responsibility. Get 3 letters of recommendation from your guards proving good behavior. If the board approves it, we will send you a stipend for books and hygiene products." There was a stunned silence on the line. An application, she spat, her voice turning ugly again. "You want me to apply for my own money?" "It is not your money, Nia," I said, my voice hardening. "It never was. It belongs to the foundation, and the foundation only supports those who earn it. You had a free ride for 32 years, and you tried to kill the driver. Now you have to walk. Write the essay, Naya, or don't. It is up to you. You are a monster," she screamed. "I hope you die alone." "I already died, Nia," I said calmly. "The father you knew died the night you poisoned his soup. The man you are talking to now is just a donor, and this donor is busy." I hung up the phone. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry. I felt closure. I tapped the block caller button on my screen. It was a small digital action, but it felt like slamming a heavy iron door shut and turning the key. I was done. I went back to the scholarship applications. I picked up the next one in the stack. It was from a girl named Sarah who wanted to be an architect. She wrote about building homes for the homeless, about creating spaces that were safe and enduring. I smiled. I picked up my pen and wrote "approved" in the margin. This was my legacy now. Not a daughter who wanted to bury me, but a generation I could help to rise. I was Reginald Carter. I was 72 years old, and I was just getting started. The air inside the Capitol grill was cool and smelled of aged leather and expensive steak, a scent that signaled success in Atlanta. I sat at the head of a long mahogany table, but this time I was not surrounded by people waiting for me to die. I was surrounded by people who were just beginning to live. To my right sat Maya, the social worker who had helped me navigate the wreckage of my old life and build the foundation of my new one. To my left was Marcus, the sharp young man from the foster system who was now pulling a 4.0 GPA in engineering at Georgia Tech. Across from him was Sarah, the architecture student who wanted to build homes for the homeless. There were 6 students in total, my scholars, my legacy. We were celebrating the end of their first semester and the launch of the foundation's new mentorship program. The mood was light, filled with the kind of genuine laughter that cannot be bought or faked. Marcus was telling a story about his thermodynamics professor, a man who apparently hated split infinitives more than structural failures. I listened, nodding and smiling, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the vintage Cabernet I was drinking. This was what I had missed for 40 years. This was the exchange of ideas, the passing of the torch. Nia and Hunter had never asked me about my work or my life. They only asked about my bank account. These kids asked me how to calculate load-bearing ratios and how to navigate office politics. They drank in my experience like water in a desert. I looked at Maya. She raised her glass in a silent salute. She knew what this meant to me. She knew that I wasn't just writing checks, I was rewriting my ending. The waiter approached our table, a young man in a crisp white jacket moving with the silent efficiency of a well-oiled machine. He cleared the appetizer plates and signaled for the next course. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice smooth and professional. "For the second course, the chef has prepared his signature dish, New England clam chowder with fresh herbs and a drizzle of truffle oil." The room seemed to freeze. The laughter died in Marcus's throat. Sarah put down her water glass with a sharp clink. Maya stiffened her eyes, darting instantly to my face. They all knew. The story of the poisoned soup had been the centerpiece of the scandal that rocked the community. It was the detail that had turned public opinion from curiosity to horror. The clam chowder was not just a menu item, it was a weapon. It was the symbol of my daughter's betrayal. The waiter, oblivious to the sudden tension, began to place the wide-rimmed bowls in front of us. The steam rose, carrying the rich scent of cream and sea salt. It smelled exactly like the soup Nia had made. Marcus looked ready to intercept the waiter. "Mr. Reggie," he started, his voice tight. "You do not have to eat that. We can send it back. We can order something else." Sarah looked pale, pushing her bowl away as if it were radioactive. Maya reached out her hand, hovering over my arm, ready to stop me. "Reginald," she said softly, "it is okay." I looked at the bowl sitting in front of me. It was white, pristine, and innocent. I looked at the faces around the table. They were terrified for me. They were protective of me. They were angry on my behalf. It was a stark contrast to the night I sat across from Hunter, watching him shovel poison into his mouth, while my daughter watched with cold anticipation. These people strangers a year ago cared more about my well-being than my own flesh and blood ever had. I picked up my spoon. The silver felt cool and heavy in my hand. I looked at Marcus, who was gripping the table edge. I looked at Maya, who was holding her breath. I smiled. It was not the cold, terrifying smile I had given Nia in the interrogation room. It was a genuine smile, a smile of peace. "It is just soup, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. The spoon dipped into the creamy liquid, breaking the surface. I lifted it to my lips. The room held its breath. I tasted it. It was rich, savory, and warm. It tasted of cream and clams and truffle oil. It did not taste of metal. It did not taste of horse tranquilizer. It did not taste of death. I swallowed. I took another spoonful. Then I looked up at them, my eyes twinkling. "It needs a little pepper," I said. The tension in the room broke like a fever. Marcus let out a breath he had been holding for 10 seconds. Sarah giggled nervously. Maya smiled, shaking her head in disbelief. "You are a tough man, Reginald Carter," she said. I continued to eat, enjoying every bite. I wiped the bowl clean with a piece of crusty bread, just as Hunter had done, but I did so with the grace of a man who has nothing to fear. I put my spoon down and wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. I looked at my scholars, my family. "You know," I said, leaning back in my chair, "I used to hate this soup. Not because of the taste, but because of what it represented. It represented my blindness. It represented the moment I realized my daughter wanted me dead. But tonight it tastes different." Marcus asked, "Why, Mr. Reggie?" I looked him in the eye. "Because the best soup is soup that does not taste of betrayal," I said. "Tonight it tastes like freedom. Tonight it tastes like company. Tonight it tastes like victory." We finished the meal with laughter and stories. We talked until the restaurant began to empty and the candles burned low. I paid the bill with my black card, tipping the waiter generously for a service he didn't know was symbolic. We walked out into the cool Atlanta night, the city lights twinkling around us like diamonds on black velvet. The valet brought my car around the engine, purring softly. The students hugged me one by one. "Thank you, Mr. Reggie," Sarah said. "I will email you the designs on Monday." "I expect nothing less," I replied. Marcus shook my hand, his grip strong and honest. "See you next week, sir." "I will be there, son." Maya hugged me last. "You did good, Reggie," she whispered. "You reclaimed it." I nodded. I did. They drove off in their modest cars, heading back to dorm rooms and apartments filled with dreams and textbooks. I stood on the curb for a moment alone, but not lonely. I turned to look at the large glass window of the restaurant. The interior lights were dimming, reflecting the street scene back at me. I saw my reflection. I saw a tall black man in an impeccably tailored suit, standing straight and strong. The cane was in my hand, but I was not leaning on it. I was holding it like a scepter. My hair was gray, my face was lined with 72 years of living, but my eyes were clear. There was no fear in them. There was no sadness. I looked at the man in the glass and I recognized him. He was not the victim of elder abuse. He was not the duped father. He was Reginald Carter, the engineer. He was the man who had built a fortune from nothing. He was the man who had survived a murder attempt and taken down a criminal conspiracy without lifting a finger in violence. He was the man who had turned a tragedy into a legacy. I thought about Nia sitting in her cell wearing a jumpsuit that scratched her skin, eating food that tasted of cardboard. I thought about Hunter limping through the prison yard, looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life, and then I let them go. They were part of the old structure, a condemned building I had demolished to make way for new construction. I raised my hand to my reflection, a silent salute to the survivor. I had walked through the fire, and I had come out the other side not as ash but as steel. I was old, yes. My time was shorter than it had been, but the time I had left belonged to me. It belonged to the foundation. It belonged to Marcus and Sarah and Maya. It belonged to the truth. I turned away from the window and got into my car. I put it in gear and drove toward my penthouse, toward the skyline, toward the future. The road ahead was clear, the tracks were solid, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one driving the train. Life teaches us that blood is merely biology, not destiny. For decades, I believed my duty as a father required endless sacrifice, even when met with ingratitude. I was wrong. True family is not built on genetic obligation, but on mutual respect, loyalty, and shared values. When you allow people to mistreat you simply because they share your last name, you aren't protecting them. You are enabling their corruption. My greatest victory wasn't saving my fortune. It was reclaiming my dignity. We must have the courage to prune the dead branches from our family tree so that new healthy relationships can finally bloom. If you agree that respect must be earned regardless of DNA, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven them or did they get exactly what they deserved?